The external wounds. Dr. Martino never confirmed the wounds from which Diana suffered, but Dr. Milius did. He said Diana had a 3-centimeter cut on her forehead and that her right arm was fractured, plus she had a wound in the buttock. Dr. Bruno Raiu said that the princess's wounds were so severe and evident. This description contradicts all statements contained in the books that her external condition was considered good, and she had no wounds except for a small wound on her forehead. Dominique Agneer, the nurse at the hospital and the only person who said that the ambulance arrived at 1:30, said that the princess was not in a serious condition and she was not showing any external injuries. This is the opposite of what Dr. Raiu has been quoted as saying. From David Cohen's book Death of a Goddess, we can establish the following. Trevor Rees-Jones' lawyer had not seen Diana's medical report and only received a report of a description of wounds and a death certificate. The report was comprised of just one sheet of paper, while the rest of the medical information and blood results disappeared from the file completely. The head of the French investigation, Hervé Stéphan, said in his report that Diana's wounds were quite exceptional. And it says that there were also orders stating that it was a necessity that no one from the hospital mention anything about what happened there. In Death of a Princess, a police captain describes Diana's wounds as follows. She had an open wound on her forehead and also a bleeding cut on her right arm and nothing more. But a police report later on had more detailed and exaggerated descriptions. The wounds were exaggerated so as to implant the idea of the hopelessness of the case step by step. The report stated head injuries, lethargic coma, multiple fractures of the right arm, bleeding wound on the head as well as the right buttock, chest injuries, very grave condition. And Massoni, the prefect of police, insisted on saying her condition is very grave. This description was based on the medical team's information given to him at the scene. Another witness was the communications director at the hospital, Thierry Moraes, who was mentioned in the book The Day Diana Died, where he said she looked entirely peaceful. Her face hadn't been marked at all, really. Just a little bruising, that's all. At 5:55 the doctors held a press conference about the alleged cause of death and never mentioned any other injuries. This then completely contradicts what the French Minister of Health Dr. Bernard Kouchner and other officials stated, that Diana suffered from multiple injuries and this meant that she had had no chance to survive. This statement is not based on any reality. The horrible wounds were just a description of the other body, and these were the first steps for introducing its details publicly. Here we refer back to the sections on the time of arrival plus the patient's identity. You will find that there is a very strong indication that Agneer, the nurse, saw the real Diana who arrived at 1:30 and she looked just fine, while Bruno Raiu at 2:06 saw the alternative woman who had severe wounds. Remember that France Internationale source said he saw a dead woman and not a living one being taken into the hospital. If some doubt this, one could ask how come she reached the hospital at 1:30 when the ambulance left the tunnel at 1:41 and took a long time on the way. The answer is that there was a different timeline mentioned in other books, such as in Death of a Princess. The writers wrote that in fact the SAMU ambulance bearing Diana left the tunnel at about 1:25 and not 1:41. In this account, the vehicle was also escorted by 2 policemen on motorcycles with sirens blaring. Now do you remember the 2 journalists' testimony? They did not mention any policemen while they were following the ambulance. There is a big question mark here about whether it was Diana's ambulance. The journey at that time of the night can take just 5 minutes. If the real Diana's SAMU left at 1:25, then Dominique Agneer's testimony that he saw Diana in a good condition being taken to the hospital at 1:30 would make sense. The Day Diana Died by Christopher Anderson also claims that the SAMU ambulance, which carried Diana, left the tunnel at 1:20. These books were written in 1998. It is very clear to me that the later official reports which told of the SAMU vehicle's movement at 1:41 were actually made up to fit in with the arrival time of the alternative woman who arrived at the hospital at 2:06, while the real Diana arrived at 1:30. Though this is perfectly logical, we still need to be methodical about tracing the steps of her treatment so as not to leave anything out. So for now I will stick to the version where arrival was at 2:06. There are documents cited by John Morgan in his book Diana Inquest the Documents, and we see there are 2 documents of entry for Diana to the hospital. We see differences in the two documents in codes, names, addresses, date of birth, and more, but under the same file number. Professor Pierre Coryat, who was working at the hospital in 1998, was questioned about the reason for seizing and placing the full medical file of Princess Diana under seal. He said that, in order to maintain the anonymity of this patient, the name Sabine had been written. I believe that the emergence of Sabine's name and the details about her have brought to light the process of hiding the princess. Also, the continuation of trying to justify the failure to do everything properly and legally for fear of exposing the princess's identity to the media is an excuse uglier than a sin. But assuming that we accept the lame excuse that all of this was done to protect the princess's identity, then why are the times of entry different by half an hour, where one says the entry time was 2:30 and the other says 3 o'clock? We know that both are questionable because the known time was 2:06. We also see the title Princess of Wales written in Sabine's document, which was allegedly written to protect her identity. Wouldn't the title of Princess of Wales be a blatant clue about the identity of the patient? Again, if we accept this excuse, then why was the word died handwritten on Sabine's document and the word left typed out on Diana's? The ambiguous nature of left could indicate dead or alive departure. This is not explained in the document that contains more accurate details about the princess. And I must remind you that there is also a document proves that the medicines were prescribed 2 days prior to the incident, and there should not have been a prescription before the arrival of the patient. If there is any explanation to this, it was not given. These facts were hidden from the jury in the case in 2008. This indicates that the plan was hatched up even in terms of providing the necessary medicines to save the princess quickly after the incident. I say that little by little, the post-incident stage was populated with details about another woman, and I say that the woman allegedly buried and out there is not Diana.